Hey, thanks for joining the channel. In today's episode, we're going to build this recipe box. Stay with us.
Desperado, sitting in a old Monte Carlo, a man whose heart is hollow.
All right, step one in this recipe box, I'm using some oak board that I've got, but you can use anything. And really, thickness, I'd prefer a 1/2 inch or even 3/8, but I have 3/4 here, and I don't want to plane this down, and I don't want to resaw it. So I'm going to use 3/4 inch oak, and but in this first step, we're going to cut the fronts and the sides to the right dimensions. And you need two 8-inch, two sides that are about 5.5 inches long. Ultimately, the height of my recipe box is going to be roughly 5 3/4, 5.5, somewhere between 5.5 and 6 inches tall, but I'm not going to worry about that now. So I just basically rough cut these boards to get a straight edge so I can get square on them. And I'll deal with the height of the box after the fact. So step one, let's cut these to the right length, 8 inches and then 5.5 inches. Cut. Now what you saw me do is I measured the first one, let's say the front or the back here. First of all, I labeled them front and back depending on basically the grain that I wanted, so I always know what's inside the box and outside the box. And I always like to measure one, cut it, and then use that unit as my measurement for the second one. That way, in this case, it doesn't have to be exactly 8 inches. It's got to support a 6x4 recipe card. So as long as I'm, greater than 6 inches and I've got a 1/2 inch of play there, including the thickness of my wood. What's most important for this box to be square is that both units or both pieces of wood are the same length. So when you measure, you're really setting yourself up for two different sizes. It's better to use the first unit that you measured and cut as your template, and then if you're going to be wrong, both units are going to be wrong but the same length. So just a little trick there. Okay, we're on to the next step. We're going to put rabbets. So on our corners, we're going to put, to get her 90 degrees, we're going to put a rabbet on the front and the back of the box. So I've taken the longer pieces, the 8-inch pieces. I've chosen which one I want to be the back and the front, and I've labeled them. That's just to help me that I don't put the rabbet on the wrong side of the board. And I want to put the rabbet on the back side of this front piece, what I'm calling the front. Now I'm using this sled here. If you haven't seen that episode, check that link up above. I made this, it's just some parts from Amazon. Super nice. And we're going to use the stop block that's attached on here. So what I want is I want to put a rabbet on the back side of this board that matches up perfectly. So it's going to be 3/4 inch wide, and it's going to be a 1/2 inch deep. So to double check my measurements, I used a scrap of wood, and I put it on my slide and cut it, and measured my depth of my blade. Again, I want to get a 1/2 inch. It doesn't have to be exact, but you want it to be exact on all 4 cuts. And so I've got a 1/2 inch, I've got my depth set. Now I want to set my block. So I did the same thing. I put my stop block exactly where I needed. In fact, I pushed my stop block up, used a scrap piece of wood, and said, okay, I want this to be 3/4 inch, and set it there. And I ran a test, and it's pretty darn close. Now, if I'm going to error, I'm going to error on the proud side. In other words, I want the side to be sticking out a little bit. and I can just sand that corner to match it and get it flush with the front. So we are going to cut some rabbets here on both ends on the back side of the front and back of the box. Okay, at this stage, before I start gluing and assembling, I'm going to actually stain. You really have to only stain the inside, but I'm going to do the inside and the outside. I may have to come and touch this up, but my intent is it's so much easier to stain it now before you assemble it and get in the corners and cracks and things like that. So I'm going to stain this. I'm using a Minwax honey formula for the stain. So I'll stir that up real good, apply it with a rag, and wipe it off, and we'll go from there. Alright, at this phase we are into the box assembly. So I'm going to glue, and I'm going to use 3 brads, or 18 gauge 1.5 inch brads to nail this in. Now you wouldn't have to nail it if you wanted to just use glue and a bunch of clamps. You could clamp this, and I'm using these really neat metal squares to make sure it's square and also aid in the clamping before I nail it. So the key here is we want to make sure when we're finished that this box is very close to square, if not perfectly square. So anyway, let's get to this and start gluing up. I'm using Type Bond 3. You can really use any strong glue that you're going to use. I like Type Bond. I use it a lot. It's waterproof. In this case, it really doesn't make a difference, but it's proven. And before I nail this, I want to check the bottom of this, make sure it's square, which it is, really square. And you'll notice I'm going to nail this. I could nail it in the front or in the side, but I'm going to nail it in the side. The only reason I'm doing that is to avoid, you know, if it does leave a dimple or anything like that, you're probably not going to see it on the side versus if it was in the front facing you. The other thing on the nails, because I'm going to come back later and cut this with the table saw in a future step, I'm going to put 3 nails, one at the very top, one at the very bottom, and one very close to the middle. I'm going to try to avoid 1 inch to 2 inches down, because that's where I'm going to be cutting with my table saw. Okay, we got our side assembled, and it's super square and really easy, and almost impossible to see those nail holes. You can see a little bit of a crack here, but again, stay with me here. I'm going to show you how you can hide that. But let's go on and finish the rest of these box sides, glue them together, and get this done. Alright, it looks great. I'm happy with where we're at, but whenever you're doing jointing, you're always going to have, you're striving for a perfect joint, but most likely you're not going to be perfect. So most of these joints are really pretty good, but just to seal them up and to make them look a little better, I'm going to show you a little trick. And what you do is you just take a little glue, put it in your hand, and then use the sander collector that you've been sanding this with, pour a little sawdust in there and just kind of rub it around until it becomes the consistency of like bubble gum, chewed bubble gum. And then you're going to roll it up and then just fill these holes. Now, because that wood is basically the dust from this wood, sand over top of it, which will fill it in even more. And then we'll restain that seam and restain the wood around it, and it'll be much tighter. Okay, for the top of this box, I took the same oak material I was using and I planed it down. It's just a shy under a ½ inch, so consider it a ½ inch. You can make the top and bottom as thick as you want, but just 3/4 of an inch just looked odd to me. So the next step here is I'm going to glue the top and bottom on here and just put some 23 gauge pin nails in here. And then we'll go to the last step, which is cutting the lid off and putting hinges on. All right, so after all that work, we've got a box. It's actually a really solid and heavy box with 3/4 inch wood. Now we're going to cut the lid off. So now that the top and bottom are put on, we're going to I'm going to set my fence 3 3/4 inches from the bottom up, and that will leave, if you think about a 4-inch 4x6 card, be about 1/4 inch card. When you open up the top lid, that there's a 1/4 inch, you can get access with your fingers there. So that's where I'm going to cut. So what I want to do is I want to set my table saw blade just a little deeper than that, so I know I'll cut all the way through, and we're going to cut the front and back of this, the long pieces first, and then I'll lower the blade and cut the sides and avoid some kickback from not having any support when I use this on the table saw. So let's cut the lid off. Okay, now that I've got the sides cut, I'm going to do the ends, and I lowered my blade just so I'll have like a 32nd of an inch of wood there to support this, so it doesn't kick back. Take my X-Acto knife here and get in there and just cut that piece. And now I've got my lid and the bottom, and I'll sand this and stain it really nice, and then this is what we're going to attach with our hinges. So what I like to do is, before I attach the top to the main case here, the recipe box, I'm going to put some paper, use it as a shim on the back side, and that allows me to have a little bit of grace, and gives me a little bit of play so the hinge isn't binding on the lid. So here's the finished product. I'm pretty happy with it. I think I am going to take the time for future ones and cut the stock down to 1/2 inch, or work with 1/2 inch stock. It's pretty heavy but beefy, and I really like the look of that oak with the honey stain on it. So hey, really appreciate you watching the channel. Would encourage you to subscribe and write any comments. We love to hear from our audience. But until next time, be safe, have fun, and make some sawdust.